war had lasted far longer than anyone had expected. Earth was a graveyard of cities, its skies permanently bruised with the blackened wreckage of fallen warships. The last human stronghold, the Ardent Dawn orbital station, drifted just above the ruined planet, its lights flickering, its defenses barely holding. Humanity was not just losing, it was nearly erased. And now, with the Varkari fleet only 3 days away, there was no hope left. Commander Elias Kane stood at the station's central command deck, staring at the holographic display of Earth's orbit. The crimson icons of the Varkari warships loomed just beyond the outer perimeter. He had fought them for over a decade, watched as their biomechanical fleets cut through human colonies like wildfire. Now, all that remained of his species were huddled in this last orbiting fortress, waiting for the inevitable. Dr. Sophia Vance adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. She was one of the last remaining scientists of Earth's once great research division, and she had spent the last 2 years developing something radical, something Kane would never approve of. "We still have one chance," she said. "A way to make sure humanity doesn't go down without a fight." Kane turned to her, his tired eyes filled with skepticism. "We don't have the weapons. We don't have the ships. We can't fight a fleet of that size." Vance took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "Not with conventional weapons, no. But we don't need to win. We just need to make them afraid." Sergeant Dex Rourke leaned against the bulkhead, his cybernetic arm clicking softly as he flexed his fingers. He had been listening in silence, but now he spoke. "Afraid?" The Varkari wiped out whole worlds without a second thought. "What do you have that could make them hesitate?" Vance pressed a command on her wrist console, and the room dimmed as a hologram appeared in the air between them. A tall, skeletal machine, its frame lined with glowing circuits, hovered above the table. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. "This is the quantum resurrection engine," she said. "It doesn't just heal wounds. It doesn't just keep a soldier on their feet. It brings them back. Instantly." The silence in the room was immediate. Kane took a slow step forward, his fingers running across the cold edge of the hologram. His jaw clenched. "This is impossible." Vance shook her head. "It's experimental, but it works. We tested it on rodents first, then primates, then a volunteer." Rourke narrowed his eyes. "A volunteer?" Vance hesitated. "Lieutenant Brax. He was mortally wounded 3 months ago. Internal hemorrhaging. He died, and then he came back." Kane exhaled sharply. "What happened to him?" A pause. "He was fine at first, but over time, he changed. He became stronger, faster, more resilient than any human we've ever known." "And where is he now?" Rourke asked. Vance hesitated again. "He went missing 2 weeks ago." Kane cursed under his breath. "You're telling me you lost a resurrected super soldier?" "We didn't lose him," she said. "He left. He said he could hear something." Rourke folded his arms, the faint glow of his cybernetic implants reflecting off the holotable. "That's comforting." Kane turned back to the hologram. He hated this. He hated that they had been pushed this far. This was not war anymore. It was desperation. "Zal Vareth," he said suddenly, "you fought alongside the Varkari. What would they think of this?" The alien stood in the shadows near the far wall, his elongated form shifting slightly. He was one of the few defectors from the Varkari Dominion, an exile who had chosen to fight alongside humanity after witnessing the Dominion's brutality firsthand. Zal's deep voice hummed through the room. "This is not technology the Varkari would use. We have heard of such experiments. The Dominion scholars called it the Path of the Forgotten. They shut it down centuries ago." Kane frowned. "Why?" Zal's black eyes fixed on him. "Because those who came back were not the same." A cold silence followed. Vance finally spoke. "We don't have a choice. This is the only way. If our soldiers can't die, then the Varkari can't win. It's that simple." Kane stared at her, weighing his options. The ethical nightmare of what she was proposing was one thing, but the strategic advantage was undeniable. If they had soldiers who would not stay dead, they could break the enemy's morale, maybe even force them to retreat. 3 days, he murmured. "We have 3 days to prepare." Rourke pushed off the bulkhead and rolled his shoulders. "We gonna test this thing on a soldier or what?" Vance hesitated. "We need a willing participant." Rourke smirked. "Well, guess what? You just found one." Kane turned sharply. "Rourke, this isn't some casual field test. You'd have to die." Rourke's cybernetic arm flexed again. "Yeah, well, I never liked staying dead anyway." The chamber was cold, filled with a metallic hum as scientists and officers stood in a tight semicircle around the quantum resurrection engine. Its core pulsed with a dim, eerie glow, its purpose both miraculous and terrifying. The room smelled of antiseptic, metal, and something else. Anticipation, fear, uncertainty. Commander Kane stood with his arms crossed, watching as Dr. Vance prepped the machine. The tension was thick, unspoken doubts evident in the way his fingers tightened around his sleeves. He glanced at Rourke, who sat on the med table with an easy grin, rolling up his sleeve as if this was nothing more than a routine vaccination. "This is insane," Kane muttered. "There has to be another way." Vance didn't look up from her console. "We don't have another way." Zalvareth shifted his elongated frame, his dark, expressionless eyes locked on the machine. "You are about to cross a threshold even the Dominion feared. If you fail to control what you awaken, the consequences will be beyond your understanding." Rourke smirked. "You make it sound like I'm gonna come back with tentacles." Vance shot him a warning look. "This isn't a joke." Kane exhaled through his nose, the weight of the decision pressing against him. "Let's get this over with." The room fell silent. The scientists moved quickly, securing Rourke's body to the monitoring station. The injection was prepared, a toxin designed to simulate the exact moment of biological death. It would stop his heart, force his body into complete shutdown. If the quantum resurrection engine worked as theorized, his body would be reconstructed, rebooted, his mind intact. If it didn't, Rourke wouldn't be the first casualty in this war, but he'd be the most unnecessary. Vance held the syringe, fingers gripping it tighter than she needed to. She wasn't just administering an injection, she was taking a life, trusting that she could bring it back. "Last chance to back out," she said quietly. Rourke leaned back, giving her a wink. "See you on the other side." The needle slipped into his vein. A moment later, the toxin entered his bloodstream. Kane checked his watch. Heart rate's dropping. The monitors beeped, displaying a cascading list of vitals. Rourke's breath slowed. The warmth in his skin faded. His smirk twitched and disappeared. Then, nothing. The long, flat tone of the heart monitor filled the room. Silence. Vance stepped back, her fingers hovering over the activation console. Initiating revival sequence. The resurrection engine pulsed. Light spiraled through the air, golden threads of energy crackling as the machine reached into the depths of matter and memory. Rourke's body twitched. The data stream surged, symbols racing across screens too fast to read. The lights in the room flickered. Kane clenched his fists. "Come on!" The energy grew brighter, the chamber humming with unnatural resonance. Rourke's fingers twitched, his limbs jerking as if something was pulling him upward. Then, in one sudden, violent inhale, his chest expanded, his spine arching, his eyes snapping open. He gasped, sucking in air like a drowning man breaking the surface. His pupils dilated, unfocused, his hands gripping the edge of the table, hard enough to dent the metal. The machine shut down, leaving only the echo of the energy's hum. Kane took a cautious step forward. "Rourke?" Rourke exhaled, his shoulders shaking. He blinked rapidly, his breathing shallow. For a moment, he just stared at them all, eyes wide, almost lost. Then he swung his legs over the edge of the table, flexing his fingers. "Holy shit!" Vance checked the monitors, double-checked them, then checked them again. Vitals are stable, higher than before, but stable. Zalvareth's voice was low. "Something is wrong." Kane frowned. "What do you mean?" The alien didn't answer. He was staring at Rourke, unblinking. Rourke rubbed his temples. "I feel different." Vance typed rapidly, running diagnostic scans. "Any pain? Memory gaps?" Rourke shook his head, then stopped. "Number but." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't alone." The words hung in the air. Vance's hands froze over the console. Kane's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Kane asked carefully. Rourke blinked, his jaw clenching. He looked around the room as if he expected something to be lurking just out of sight. "When I was dead, I wasn't just gone. I was somewhere, and something was there, watching." A cold chill ran through the room. Vance forced a laugh, but it was hollow. "It's probably just residual neural feedback." "No," Rourke cut in. "It was real." Silence. Zalvareth exhaled slowly. "This is what we feared." Kane shot him a sharp look. "Explain." Zal's gaze didn't waver. "The Dominion abandoned resurrection technology because it does not simply restore the body. It touches something else, something outside our reality." Vance crossed her arms. "That's speculation." Rourke flexed his fingers, watching how his muscles responded. "Feels like more than speculation." Kane turned to Vance. "How do we test him? Make sure he's still—" Vance nodded. "We'll run cognitive exams, motor function assessments, full analysis." Rourke grinned suddenly, a bit too wide. "Let's see if I came back with some upgrades." The air in the room didn't shift, but the tension thickened. Kane wasn't sure why, but something in his gut told him the experiment had worked too well. Rourke was alive, stronger, faster, but something had come back with him. The orders came down fast. The resurrection engine had worked. Rourke was proof of that. But now they needed more than just one soldier. They needed an army. Kane knew this was a dangerous gamble, but there was no turning back. Humanity had already lost too much. The volunteers gathered in the chamber, standing in silence. Some were nervous, others eager, all of them prepared to die. Each one strapped in, the medics working quickly to administer the fatal dose. One by one, they went still. The room filled with the steady hum of the engine, its glow pulsing brighter as it activated. The energy rippled through the air, pulling them back from the void. Then one by one, they took their first gasping breaths. Kane watched, hands clenched at his sides. Each soldier rose from the table, eyes sharper, movements quicker, breath steadier than before. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no pain. Rourke smirked as he stepped forward. "Told you it worked." Vance ran her scans, muttering data to herself. "Their vitals are off the charts. Strength, endurance, reaction time, it's all enhanced." Zalvareth didn't speak, only observed. His expression unreadable, his long fingers curled tightly against his arms. Then the alarms blared. A Varkari scouting party had broken through the perimeter, fast-moving strike ships weaving through the debris of Earth's old defense grid. This was it, the first real test. Kane barked orders. The resurrected soldiers suited up, stepping into battle armor, securing weapons to their backs. The docking bay doors groaned open, revealing the void beyond. With practiced precision, they launched into the fight. The Varkari had come expecting the last remnants of a dying species. They found something else entirely. Blaster fire cut through the battlefield. The resurrected soldiers moved like ghosts, too fast, too precise, cutting through the enemy ranks like they had been fighting for years. And when they fell, they simply stood back up, their wounds sealing, their bodies resetting. The Varkari hesitated, their formations breaking, their warriors faltering. Kane watched from the command deck, gripping the railing tight. It was working. The enemy was afraid, but something wasn't right. Rourke moved through the fight with an unnatural grace, his cybernetic arm flashing as he tore through an armored Varkari warrior. He didn't even pause to check his wounds when a plasma bolt tore through his side. The pain didn't register. He turned, killed his attacker, and kept moving. Vance's voice crackled in Kane's earpiece. "Something's wrong. Their neural patterns are off. They aren't hesitating, aren't reacting to pain or injury the way they should." Kane didn't respond. He could see it himself. The resurrected didn't flinch, didn't breathe heavy, didn't even blink as they waded through the battlefield. The Varkari saw it too. Their warriors began retreating, scrambling back to their ships, abandoning their wounded. The battle was over in minutes, a complete slaughter. Rourke returned to the command deck, his armor scorched, his expression unreadable. He looked at Kane, then at Vance. They ran. Kane exhaled. They were afraid. Zalvareth stepped forward. They were afraid because they realized the truth. They were not fighting soldiers. They were fighting something else. Vance ran a shaking hand through her hair. We need to do more testing. Their brain activity, it's not normal. Rourke laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Normal? We just proved we can't be killed. What's normal about that? Kane didn't like the way he said it. He didn't like the look in his soldiers' eyes. The battle had been won, but something deeper had shifted. He could feel it. He turned to Vance. Run every test you need. I want to know exactly what's happening to them. Vance nodded, but she already knew the answer. The resurrection engine had worked. It had worked too well. The data was coming in fast, too fast for Vance to process all at once. Neural scans, muscle density reports, oxygen efficiency. It was all off the charts. But something else was happening, something she hadn't anticipated. She gripped the edge of her console, staring at the numbers, willing them to make sense. Kane stood behind her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. What am I looking at? Vance shook her head. I don't know yet. Their bodies are healing faster, that's expected. But their neural pathways, they're reorganizing, like they're adapting to something we can't see. Zalvareth's voice was calm, but heavy with something close to dread. This is what I feared. The Varkari once tried what you have done. It is why they abandoned it. Kane frowned. Explain. Zalvareth tilted his head, eyes never leaving the resurrected soldiers in the training bay below. When we first discovered the process, it seemed a gift. Our warriors could return stronger, faster, but they were different. They spoke of voices in the dark, of things that watched from the abyss, and then one day they simply stopped being Varkari at all. Vance swallowed hard. Stopped? What do you mean? Zalvareth's dark eyes met hers. They lost themselves, became something else, a new entity with no loyalty, no fear, no restraint. The Dominion destroyed them before it could spread. Kane exhaled slowly. You're saying we're making the same mistake? Zalvareth did not answer. Below them, the resurrected soldiers were moving. It wasn't the usual training routine. Kane had seen drills before, shouted orders, momentary confusion, individuals adjusting at their own pace. But this was different. The entire group moved as one, without command, their steps perfectly in sync, as if answering an unspoken signal. Vance's breath caught. They're synchronized. Kane tapped his earpiece. Rourke, report. What the hell's going on down there? Rourke's voice came through steady. Just running drills, Commander. Kane's grip tightened. No one gave the order to move in sync like that. There was a pause, too long for comfort. Then Rourke spoke, quieter this time. Didn't realize we were. Vance turned to Kane, voice low. This isn't normal. Kane watched as the soldiers stopped at the same instant, turning in unison. No words were exchanged, no signals. Yet they all knew exactly what to do next. Then one of them tilted his head as if listening to something. A second later, so did the others. Every single one of them. Kane's spine went rigid. What the hell are they listening to? Vance's hands flew over her console. I don't know, there's no external signal, no implants, no comms interference. They're just... A soldier in the training base suddenly turned, looking directly at the observation window. The others followed one by one until the entire group was staring up at them. Kane's stomach turned cold. Rourke's voice crackled through the channel. Commander, I think... He stopped, exhaling sharply. A strange static sound hummed over the line for a second. Then he spoke again, but his voice was distant, detached. We're not alone anymore. The lights flickered. A low subharmonic vibration filled the room. Kane's vision blurred at the edges for just a second, and for the first time in his life, he felt something close to fear. Vance's hands were shaking now. Kane, we have to shut it down. We have to shut the engine down now. Kane hesitated. The soldiers below were stronger than anything he had ever seen. The resurrection engine worked. It gave them a chance, a real chance against the Varkari. But something was wrong. He could feel it. His hand hovered over the console. He could give the order. Shut it down. End it before whatever was happening spread. But then what? The Varkari fleet was still out there. They would come. They would burn Earth to the ground. The only thing standing between extinction and survival was the resurrection engine. The choice was simple: victory at the cost of humanity itself. The Varkari fleet arrived in perfect formation, their massive warships stretching across the sky like an artificial eclipse. Their commanders expected an easy battle, a final sweep of a species too stubborn to die quickly. The calculations were simple. The last remnants of humanity were outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated. The war would end here. Then they scanned the battlefield, and something was wrong. The energy signatures were unlike anything they had encountered before. There was a presence in the readings, something that did not conform to physics, something that pulsed beyond the measurable spectrum. Their tactical AI recalculated, adjusted. Yet every equation returned the same result. This was not the same enemy they had fought for decades. On the ground, the resurrected soldiers waited. There was no fear in their ranks, no anxious shifting, no whispered prayers. They stood still, bodies taut, eyes reflecting the pale glow of the sky. Rourke cracked his knuckles, the sound unnatural in the comms channel. "They're afraid." Kane narrowed his eyes. "How do you know?" Rourke tilted his head slightly as if listening to something distant. "I can feel it." A moment of silence stretched between them. Kane had heard strange things since the resurrection engine went online. He had ignored the whispers, the odd movements, the way the soldiers reacted before orders were given. But now, looking at the readouts, at the Varkari ships hesitating, he understood. Vance's voice cut through the comms. "Their fleet's slowing down. Their formations are breaking apart. That's never happened before." Kane, watch the screen. "They don't want to engage. They don't know what they're fighting anymore." Zalvareth spoke softly. "They see what I see. The moment they fire, they will know true terror." The silence did not last. The Varkari had protocols for fear. A cowardly species would hesitate, falter, retreat. But the Dominion was not built on weakness. The lead ship signaled an orbital bombardment, and the sky turned to fire. The resurrected forces did not flinch as the first plasma rounds scorched the battlefield. They did not take cover. They simply waited. And when the impact dust settled, they still stood, their bodies untouched, their eyes staring upward. Then they moved, faster than any human should, faster than any machine. They tore across the battlefield like shadows given form, closing the distance between themselves and the Varkari before the enemy could process the impossibility of what they were seeing. Gunfire erupted. Explosions bloomed in the distance. The Varkari held their ground for a moment, relying on their superior numbers. But they weren't fighting humans anymore. They were fighting something else, something that did not stop, something that did not bleed as it should, something that did not fear. A Varkari commander on the bridge of a dreadnought trembled as he watched the battle unfold through his ship's targeting systems. Their weapons were hitting, but the enemy kept rising, kept moving. He saw one of their warriors torn apart by a direct hit from a plasma cannon, their body reduced to glowing embers. And then, seconds later, the embers pulsed. The ash reformed. The warrior stood again. Numbered not a warrior, not anymore. The Varkari fleet's command structure collapsed in under 15 minutes. Battleships turned away from the engagement, fleeing before their captains could register the betrayal of their own instincts. War was their existence, their pride, their culture. But there was no war to be had here. Only something that devoured the concept of battle itself. Kane listened as the Varkari fleet began transmitting panic signals to each other. They weren't issuing orders. They weren't organizing a counterattack. They were screaming. Rourke exhaled, watching a retreating ship vanish into the clouds. Now they understand. Rourke stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the retreating Varkari fleet. The battle was over, but something inside him told him the real fight had just begun. His fingers twitched, his muscles burned with energy that wasn't his own. He turned his hands over, examining them like a man seeing himself for the first time. Kane watched from a distance, uneasy. The soldiers who had returned through the resurrection engine stood differently now, too still, too aware. Their eyes, once full of fire, now shimmered with something else, something deeper, something not entirely human. Vance ran frantic calculations at her station. The numbers were wrong. They shouldn't be like this. They shouldn't be this strong. The resurrection engine had worked, but the bodies it brought back weren't the same as the ones that had died. The biological readings were shifting, changing in real time, adapting into something she couldn't understand. Kane's voice was sharp. "Tell me what's happening to them." Vance shook her head. "I don't know. Their neural activity it's increasing, not just in the normal ways. Their brains are synchronizing. It's like they're sharing thoughts." Zalvareth exhaled, his elongated fingers pressing together in contemplation. "It is already too late. You have invited something into your world, and now it will not leave." Rourke finally spoke. "He's right. I can feel it. Something watching, something waiting." Kane clenched his fists. "Waiting for what?" Rourke turned to face him. His pupils had expanded, swallowing the whites of his eyes. "To see what we become." A tremor passed through the facility. The resurrection engine whirred louder, its pulsing light growing erratic. Vance's screens flooded with warnings. The energy output was rising, uncontrolled, climbing past any theoretical threshold. Vance's voice cracked. "Something's forcing it open. It's not just reviving anymore. It's..." She stopped, horror washing over her face. "It's rewriting." The soldiers around them shuddered in unison, their bodies jerking slightly, as if something had just brushed past them in the dark. One collapsed to his knees, hands gripping his head. His voice, barely human, rasped out. "It's coming through." Kane grabbed Vance's arm. "Shut it down. Now." She was already moving, hands flying across the console, overriding protocols, forcing the core to destabilize. The resurrection engine groaned, its internal systems fighting against her commands. A soldier stumbled forward, his voice warping. "Why would you stop it? Don't you see? We are evolving. We are ascending." Kane raised his weapon, his stomach churning. "Stand down. That's an order." The soldier smiled, but it was wrong, too, knowing. "You think you're in control? That's adorable." Then he lunged. Kane fired. The shot hit center mass, tearing through armor and flesh. The soldier staggered back, but didn't fall. The wound sealed almost instantly, muscles knitting together before their eyes. Kane swore. "Vance, shut that damn thing down." Vance overrode the final security lock. The resurrection engine screeched, its energy spiraling out of control. The ground shook violently. The lights dimmed, flickering wildly. The air itself felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Then just as suddenly as it had started, the machine's core flashed bright white, and everything went still. The silence was unbearable. Then Rourke gasped, stumbling back as if he had been punched. His breath was ragged, his fingers digging into his own skin. When he finally looked up, his expression was blank, empty. "It's gone," he said softly, "but it knows where to find us now." Kane holstered his weapon, feeling an exhaustion deeper than any battlefield had ever given him. The resurrection engine was dead, its circuits fried, its power source severed. But the thing they had woken up, that was still out there. And it was watching. Vance whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We didn't conquer death. We just invited something to take its place." The power core surged, sending waves of energy through the ground. Kane gritted his teeth as he fought against the violent tremors rocking the facility. The resurrection engine pulsed erratically, its glow flickering between bright white and something darker, something deeper. Vance's hands flew over the console, overriding every failsafe, pushing the machine past every limit. The resurrection engine screamed in protest, a high-pitched wail that made her ears bleed. She didn't care. It had to end. Now Rourke stood at the center of it all, his expression calm as the chaos raged around him. The other resurrected soldiers shuddered, their bodies jerking as unseen forces clawed at them. Some collapsed, clutching their heads, voices slipping into inhuman frequencies. Others stood rigid, unmoving, their eyes locked onto something beyond the physical world. Then the screaming started, not from fear, not from pain, but from something being torn away. The resurrected twisted as if pulled by invisible hands, their forms flickering in and out of phase, their voices layered over one another, an unnatural chorus that sent chills through Kane's bones. The Varkari, still in orbit, witnessed it all. Their dreadnoughts, once poised to rain destruction upon the last human stronghold, hesitated. Their sensors picked up the impossible, anomalies beyond calculation, energy signatures that did not belong in any known universe. The commanders, seasoned warriors who had never known fear, faltered. They issued no more attack orders. They only watched. The resurrection engine's core began to crack. Vance slammed her palm against the final control sequence. "Overloading now! Everyone get clear!" Kane turned, barking orders. "Fall back!" Now, the surviving personnel scrambled away, dragging the few conscious resurrected with them. Sparks rained down from ruptured conduits, smoke billowing from shattered control panels. The air itself vibrated with something wrong, something unnatural. The energy built to a crescendo. And then, in one violent pulse, it collapsed inward. The resurrection engine imploded, folding space around itself. The shockwave knocked Kane off his feet, the force rattling through his skull. The resurrected soldiers who had not escaped were pulled into the abyss, their bodies vanishing, their screams cut off in an instant. Then it was over. Silence settled over the ruins. The facility lay in shambles, the floor cracked, the walls scorched. The resurrection engine was gone, erased from existence. No parts remained, no wreckage. Just emptiness where it had once stood. Kane coughed, forcing himself up. His body ached, but he was alive. They were alive. He turned to Vance, who was slumped over the remains of the control panel, breathing hard. "Is it done?" She nodded, voice hoarse. "It's gone. The energy readings are stable. Whatever was coming through, we cut it off." Kane exhaled, his mind finally grasping the weight of what had just happened. They had won. Earth was safe. The Varkari would never return, not after witnessing what they had just seen. The cost had been high, but for the first time in years, humanity had bought itself a future. Then he saw Rourke. He was still standing in the center of the room, unmoving, untouched. His armor was covered in dust, his breathing steady. But his eyes, they weren't the same. Kane approached cautiously. "Rourke!" Rourke blinked slowly, as if waking from a long dream. He flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders. His voice was quiet, unreadable. "I'm still here." Vance stood beside Kane, fear creeping into her expression. "You should have been pulled in with the others. Why are you still?" Rourke turned to her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't human. "I don't know." The silence stretched between them. Kane squared his shoulders. "Are you still one of us?" Rourke gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think so." Vance swallowed hard. "And if you're not?" Rourke glanced up, as if listening to something far beyond their reach. Then finally he turned back to them. "I guess we'll find out." Outside, the last of the Varkari fleet jumped to light speed, vanishing into the void, their empire forever changed by what they had seen. Far beyond the known galaxy, something else stirred, ancient eyes turning toward the little blue planet that had done the impossible. Dr. Vance whispered almost to herself, "We won, but we'll never be the same again." Kane nodded, staring at the sky. "The universe just learned something today. You can kill a human, but you can never keep us dead." The war was won, but at what cost? Humanity defied extinction, transcended death, and became something more. The enemy fled, terrified of what we had become. But deep in the void, something else was watching. Something older, something waiting. This is just the beginning. Join us as we unravel the truth behind the resurrection engine, the fate of the reborn soldiers, and the price of immortality. Will humanity remain human or evolve into something unrecognizable? Follow the story, spread the word, witness the next chapter, because once you've conquered death, the real fight begins.